2024 GOP candidate Vivek Ramaswamy opposes combining aid for Ukraine and Israel. Here's what he told Fox News' Jesse Waters over the weekend. Let's watch.
Don't be duped by Bidenomics on the economic argument, but don't be duped by this military homeland investment argument either. Get real. What are we giving up in return for bundling these? And I think it's a mistake to bundle the Israel discussion with the Ukraine discussion. It is a gambit to avoid debate on the merits on either one. So, Jesse, my foreign policy is really simple. Avoid World War III, declare independence from China. That's the real long-run threat we face. And then secure this homeland. And ironically, we're hearing none of how we're accomplishing that from this president or a bipartisan foreign policy establishment.
No, we're not. We're just hearing, trust us. I've been in this business a long time.
Per The Hill's reporting, Ramaswamy said in a statement that U.S. assistance to Israel should be contingent with the strategy in Gaza, and that simply saying destroy Hamas is not a, quote, viable, coherent strategy.
Meanwhile, speaking at a conference hosted by the Christians United for Israel, GOP candidate Ron DeSantis says his support for the U.S. allies stems from his faith in God. Let's watch.
Man, you're a stalwart for Israel and a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. Why? Why Israel? Well, it's something that's personal to my wife, Casey, and to me. It comes from our faith in God. It comes from the visits, and I've done a number of visits to Israel over the years, where you can walk with a Bible in your hand, read the Bible, and stand right where people like David and Jesus stood thousands and thousands of years ago.
Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley weighed in on increased demonstrations at college campuses around the country, standing in solidarity with Palestine, writing on X Saturday, quote, no more federal money for colleges and universities that allow anti-Semitism to flourish on campus, unquote.
Journalist Glenn Greenwald responded to Haley's suggestion, posing a hypothetical question on X, quote, should the U.S. government monitor which campus speech is allowed in order to punish expressions of all forms of bigotry, or just that particular one, like allowing the state to define disinformation that puts massive power in the hands of the state to decree what speech is allowed, unquote. Lots to tackle here. I agree with Glenn there that it's totally hypocritical to want to retaliate against students for expressing speech you don't like. And this, I mean, we've talked about this before. It goes exactly into the cancel culture thing. And why? And again, why is it just now that students have expressed a political view that you don't agree with, that I frankly don't agree with either, depending on what exactly is being said? Now is the time not to fund them? I mean, some conservatives have been questioning why we've been funding higher education like forever for a lot of reasons. And now it only gets raised by someone like Haley because you know, she wants to robustly support whatever Israel wants to do. And her foreign policy really does stand in contrast to Vivek Ramaswamy, who I think has correctly said that, going a little bit to when we were talking about Matt Gaetz and wanting to consider issues separately, there is no reason to lump both this funding together, and also there's a lot of reason to question whether funding either of those things are necessary or in the best interest of American defense, or is what the people want. On Ukraine...
Wait a minute. I'd like to talk about this for a second, because I think it's a big deal. I think it's a really big deal that a substantial percentage of the free speech cohort that spent so much time talking about wokeness and overreach on college campuses and how they weren't allowing freedom of expression and that good ideas should rise to the top and people should have the integrity to debate people that come to campus, et cetera. During those debates, the tee-off was between students who would say protest or turn their backs on a speaker or things like that, and the speaker that would come. And through all of that, I have always defended allowing the speaker to come and also the right of the students to protest in whatever they want and just have the competing ideas compete. But now what we're seeing is a real ratcheting up effect of full-blown authoritarianism. There are Supreme Court cases that go to the question of how much the government can apply its ideological whims on the states via withholding federal dollars. And now you have a prospective presidential candidate saying purely in ideological terms that public education should be defunded because she doesn't like her personal opinion is not to advocate for the freedoms, rights, and interests of Palestinians, and then to go one further and to characterize that advocacy as anti-Semitism. So the same people that said talking about racism in class, talking about the existence of any kind of bigotry or disparities that exist among other races and groups of people, that's woke, and we shouldn't talk about that in college. You went so far as to have Ron DeSantis basically establish New College in Florida as a ideological cauldron of his own. And now, on the flip side of it, you had Nikki Haley saying something like this. I think that kind of whole anti-woke corner of the internet, whether it's the David Rubins of the world or the Megyn Kellys of the world, who are all really on board with this project, have a huge credibility problem. And the few people like Glenn Greenwald, I've seen Kim Iverson do like a rundown of everybody who's flip-flopped on this. There are some real people who have integrity throughout, like the ones I just named, but a whole lot of these politicians have been exposed as being only interested in advancing their own ideological agenda and using federal dollars to do so.
Yeah, there are very few people who I think have managed to not be hypocritical on the kind of campus free speech issues, which I've been documenting and writing about for a long time. And honestly, the pro-Palestinian speech being suppressed is nothing new. I've written about tons of cases of that over the years. So people have had a very selective memory for this kind of stuff and have not taken a principled approach. There are people like Glenn Greenwald, like you and I. There are good organizations like the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, that used to be the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, specifically just looking at campuses. Now they do broader work, but they have called out and documented and listed attempts to disinvite or fire or cancel professors and students that come from every direction, but it's really a small number of people who have kept their integrity on this. Yeah.
Well, during a town hall in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, Nikki Haley flexed her war hawkishness while blasting the GOP. I think it's supposed to say, let's watch.
I think the DOD, Department of Defense.
Oh, sorry. During a town hall in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, Nikki Haley flexed her war hawkishness while blasting the DOD. Let's watch.
Our military ready for future wars, which are artificial intelligence, cyber, space, and make sure that they have the equipment they need to defend themselves when we're at land, air, or sea. We've got to be smart. We've got to be ready. I'm tired of talking about a Department of Defense. I want a Department of Offense.
All right, so she wants to go back to it being a war department. And there is obviously some cohort in the United States of America that agrees with her, generally speaking. You saw O.J. Simpson after one of the earlier debates saying, I really like Nikki Haley's foreign policy, and I wish she and Vivek Ramaswamy could just come together for a winning ticket. But do you think that this is going to get her very far in the Republican primary?
No, I think it's totally at odds with what not all, but many Republican voters are looking for in a candidate. She's just a total return to the foreign policy views of the Republican Party that captured the party during the Bush era, during the aughts, in the post 9/11 landscape, that captured George W. Bush, who did not actually George W. Bush, when he ran in 2000. It's interesting to always remember, did not run as a neoconservative interventionist. He during the campaign, he talked a lot about not being the world's policeman and leaving the rest of the world alone to figure it out, and that we have to look toward America, and then totally did a 180 on that in the wake of 9/11 and led the Republican Party down this, I think, ruinous path, both in terms of the policy and in terms of strategic, because his policies alienated and infuriated Republican voters who did not actually agree with the elites on these issues, or agree with Nikki Haley. So she's just a total return to that. She's rhetorically gifted. She is polling well, I think, on the strength of her kind of character and her presentation as a normal, acceptable figure. She maybe comes across as a more moderate Republican on some other issues, on social issues, on abortion, maybe more palatable. But again, it goes to show who gets termed like a non-extremist by the media. She's considered a more acceptable to the mainstream even though her foreign policy views, well, they are more acceptable to the mainstream, frankly, because the mainstream is hawkish. The mainstream is neoconservative, even when the mainstream, what we're talking about, are liberals, otherwise liberal people on foreign policy. They're hawks time and time again.
Yeah.
So
the normal thing to do is to recall tens of thousands of Israeli kids to go and fight a bunch of Palestinian kids and die in the streets for some unspecified agenda, an outcome. I think Vivek Ramaswamy is completely right when he says just saying we got to fund them endlessly without having a plan for a ground invasion is one of the most radical things you could suggest. And the fact that that is not what's considered to be radical in the American foreign policy context is very telling.
Yeah, it's very telling. And again, I think it is a misread of what the base actually wants. A main and important reason that Republicans decided they liked Donald Trump was because he articulated something different here. And Nikki Haley is offering more of the same on this specific issue. We'll continue to evaluate the candidates. More Rising in just a minute.